If you just give people a pill, you're not a good doctor. For mental health, it's fundamental to reinstate the waqf.
Dr. Francesca Bocca-Aldaqre is a neuroscientist and Islamic psychology practitioner. This week, we are inside the historic Al-Nuri Bimaristan in Damascus, a hospital that led the way in mental health provision for hundreds of years. Can the new Syria pave the way for a revival of Islamic healthcare? This was not a decoration. This institution treated everyone, the poor, the wealthy, soldiers, strangers, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, entirely free of charge.
It was so hard, and I'm grateful that it's over, but I can't feel joy. Like when I'm with my children, I can't feel. Or if I see something scary, I can't feel. And this is the new barrier for medicine, and is what billionaires are buying. And in the West, we're seeing how medicating only, silencing it and getting the person go back to work, and that's it. Beauty is really the first intervention here. These walls absorb the same suffering before, and the sufferings.
We are in the beautiful courtyard of the Al-Nuri Bimaristan in the old city of Damascus. Built in 1154 and for several centuries, the most sophisticated mental health institution on earth. The word Bimaristan comes from the Persian Bimar, the sick, and Stan, the place. But that translation does almost no justice to what this building actually was. The Arabic verse from above the wall reads, "And we send down from the Quran that which is a healing and a mercy for believers." And another verse, "O mankind, there has come to you instruction from your Lord and healing for what is in the breasts." And another verse behind me, "And then when I am ill, it is he who heals me." This was not a decoration. This was an operating philosophy. At its height, this institution treated everyone, the poor, the wealthy, soldiers, strangers, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, entirely free of charge. Running water, gardens, music, and light were not just amenities here. They were medicine for the mentally ill. And then it became a museum. My guest today has spent years thinking about this place and what it means and what it can still teach us today, about the relationship between body, mind and soul, and what it means to sit here now in a Syria emerging from 15 years of war, in a building built for exactly this kind of aftermath. This is a conversation about medicine, but also about beauty, duty, and what a society reveals and how it treats its most vulnerable people. Dr. Francesca Bocca-Aldaqre, thank you for being with us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim, this time in a beautiful city of Damascus.
Wa alaikum salam. I'm so glad to see you here.
Jazakallah khair. It's really wonderful to be with us today. And actually, it's around a year ago that we first had our conversation about mental health and Islam. And subhanAllah, who would have thought that we'll be sitting here in the old city of Damascus? So we are here, as I said, in the Al-Nuri Bimaristan. What do you want people to understand from this building and actually what its place was in our illustrious Islamic history?
Let's start imagining in the words of a traveler. So we are in the year 1884, and we have a scholar who's called Al-Kinani from Valencia. He went to Hajj, and then he comes back, passes from Damascus. And when he describes this specific Bimaristan, he describes it saying this is min mafakhir al-Islam, among the great glories of Islam. So this person has just seen Mecca, Medina, came from Valencia and Al-Andalus, and comes here and says this place is about, like, it's a proof of Islam, is a glory of Islam. And how can a hospital be a proof or a glory for Islam? I want to claim because of its function. And this hospital was built by Nureddin Zengi, and we are going to talk about him more, just months after taking Damascus. Times were tougher than now. Damascus until then was paying tribute to the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. It was deeply humiliated. And Nureddin chose to build this not after the Crusades, but during, at the peak of the conflict. And the whole neighborhood, the whole Hara around here, which we're going to discuss, represents a model of what Nureddin thought is the ideal city. What is the way to heal people and heal a community which was traumatized, which was displaced? It's the idea of tajdeed, of inner reform, before the outer one. And even Orientalists recognize the specificity of this place. For example, Lane Poole writes, the Bimaristan is the visible signature of a moral program that intended to make Damascus worth defending. And I want to stress that this has immense implications, especially for Syria today. This is not about the past, because sometimes we have this narrative, oh, we used to be fantastic once upon a time, but now we need to find new solutions because the old solutions are not valid anymore. No, we believe that to function, we have to find out what was the structure, what was the intention, and replicate it for our times.
Wonderful. And I want to talk about Nuruddin Zengi, and I want to talk about some of the implications of an institution like this for Syria trying to move out of a very bleak period in its history. But let's just talk about the patient experience. Like, what would a patient experience once they walk through the doors of this Bimaristan?
Yeah, so let's imagine a patient. And when we say a patient, we're really meaning it can be anybody.
Right.
And that's the type of people that this hospital cater to. The poor, the soldiers, the peasant, minorities too. And what they will see entering from the door itself is beautiful. And then the courtyard is beautiful. And they would see this wall. So beauty is really the first intervention here. And it's interesting that the first doctor that worked here, Al-Harithi, was also the chief craftsman. So he built everything. So the marble color, the marble disposition, which calligraphic pieces go, the reason why that writing is in blue, the reason why the muqarnas is red, everything was built by him, who was also the doctor. So this is really therapeutic beauty. Nowadays, we call this in the West dignity-confirming environmental design. This is really not something wishy-washy, because sometimes when you talk about medicine or about beauty, people think this has no scientific basis. But in the West, in the 80s, there was this study by Ulrich. He saw some people who had gallbladder surgery. Half were put in a room where they could see a tree, and half saw just a wall and a city. And the tree one healed faster. So we know this, that there is data upon this, and it's also about our own ihsan as a civilization. Also, a patient coming in would be welcomed by people with good manners. And this is very important as well. Abu Bakr al-Razi, who was one of the most important doctors in our civilization, said that the physician always has to be optimistic. So even when he has his doubts, must always make the patient believe that he will recover, that he will get better, because he writes literally, the state of the body is linked to the state of the mind. And there is a whole genre of literature, and we can find these books in the library here, which is still here, which is called Akhlaq al-Tabib, or Ethics of the Physician. In it, they talk about how to be kind to the patient, how to be soft-spoken, how to encourage psychologically. And however, at the same time, the doctor always had a form of tawakkul. So, and this is, again, in Arazi's writing, to place reliance on the treatment upon Allah. Another thing that you would see immediately, in fact, it's repeated many times, is Surah Al-Fatih. Why is there Surah Al-Fatih? It's about victory, right? Yeah. What does it have to do? This is like the motto of the whole quarter. And it connects suffering to victory. It connects medicine as one of the victories of Islam, one of the proofs of Islam. And also it's telling the patient, you know, you're suffering, but your suffering has a meaning, which is always lacking from the Western worldview and what we're used to be. I'm suffering, and then on the other hand, there is my religion, right? I just maybe can cope a little bit. Here, it's telling you, no, the sufferance, healing, and suffering is part of the great proof, the great glory of Islam.
The aesthetics, you know, when you walk in, you see this beautiful courtyard, you see a waterfall, which doesn't seem to be in operation now, but at its height, I suspect, was a beautiful waterfall. The light that's coming through, as you said, the decorative aspects of the wall, the color chosen for the marble around us. I mean, how much of this was just a complementary side to the serious work of a physician, and how much of it was actually part of the central healing of a patient?
We shouldn't understand environmental therapy as a side to the actual therapy. In Islamic medicine is also different conceptually. Yeah. I would claim that everything we see here constitutes more than half of the therapeutic implication for the patient.
More than half?
More than half, wow. Yes. And there are some reasons. in the 11th century, so when the hospital was in full function, there is a book been written by Ibn Hindu, Miftah al-Tib, the key to medicine. And he says that controlling the environment is the largest part of the doctor's ability. Because the doctor should find for that patient, does he benefit more for heat or from cold? Does he benefit more from being outside or just looking from the window? And these things were put in a therapeutic protocol. So also in our own medicine, in our own tradition, the key doctors such as Ar-Razi, Ibn Sina, they always warned against over-medication. They really said, this is the lazy way. If you just give people a pill, you're not a good doctor. And again, I want to stress that in the West, we're seeing how medicating only is a very capitalistic way of looking at the person suffering. You are just looking at the symptom, silencing it, and getting the person go back to work, and that's it. Just because it costs less and it produces more. We're not bound to that ethic. We don't have anything to do about it.
Yeah.
So, which types of interventions do we have? Well, first of all, we have light. We are now in the Eastern Iwan, that was the one for teaching, and light is optimal to teach in the time of the day in which they used to have classes. We have the inner courtyard, which also had a thermal implant, and you can see there is a bit of a breeze. That's part of the architecture of the courtyard.
And it was surprising how cool it was in here. It's a very sunny day here in Damascus.
Yes.
It was very cool as you walked in.
Yes, and this is all by design. Yeah. And we're in the Nuri Bimaristan, but there's another Bimaristan in Damascus, which is the Qaymari. And there it was chosen because of the view. It had the view towards the south. At the time, it was full of orchards. There was a beautiful hills and everything like that. And also what we have here, we can see it's perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
Symmetry has a great therapeutic effect, especially on agitation and anxiety. That's why people who are anxious feel, okay, now my room is less cluttered, I feel better. This is exactly what it is about. This wall could have been full of tiles and flowers.
Yeah.
They chose not to do it. That has a meaning. It's just enough for you to contemplate, but not too much for you to be saturated. So all of these things are important. Also water. This is an intervention. Looking at water activates your parasympathetic nervous system, so it calms you. Ibn Sina writes that you can use water as therapy with the sound, with the sight, with hydrotherapy, and air. And also, we should always remember that in Islamic medicine, we believe that inner healing facilitates outer healing and should come before. So we should never forget that the heart is the first place that should heal. That's why the patient would see selected verses of the Quran here, because these are the verses that relate to medicine and to how should you relate to be sick. Right. So these are teaching you. Just think about, sometimes the surah is cut. You see, the verse does not arrive even to the end because a person is sick. They don't give him the whole mushaf, he's tired. So respect him, just give him the words that he needs there. So that's also therapeutic. And also in our tradition, there are theological reasons for which you do not jump to medications first. Ibn Taymiyyah, who's buried less than a kilometer away from here, he used to say that the first treatment should not be pharmacological. You shouldn't run to medication. Does not show a good approach theologically. So these are some of the reasons why the environment is really more than half here.
That's fantastic. Now, at its height, who came here? Like, what kind of people walk through the door of this type of institution?
So we have this remarkably well preserved because the waqfiyah, the founding document, is still preserved.
Okay.
So it mandated treatment regardless of religion, of race, of gender, of social class, which reminds us very much of the prophetic mission of being sent illa rahmatan lil alameen, except as a mercy to the worlds. So even Ibn Jubayr, the historian, writes that in the 12th century, doctors used to give the exact same amount of attention to the patients, whatever their rank, which we never see generally. We're not only talking about, okay, you're poor and you get admitted, fine. No, we're saying you get the same type of attention. So there is no preferential public-private, the paying patient gets less than the NHS patient and so on and so forth. No. And once there is an anecdote I really love, when Nuruddin himself gets sick. Okay. And he comes here, of course, it's his hospital, and he arrives and the doctors give him a standard hospital drink, the sharab, that is just good for health but average. And he's so happy of this, of not getting preferential treatment. And he say, this is halal on me and on all the Muslims.
Mashallah.
This is really a beautiful proof of that.
Yeah.
Also, another thing, which kind of people? Let's not imagine this, especially for those that are watching, right, as a huge hospital in the Western sense. No, this place used to have maximum 200 beds at its height. Yeah. And there's a reason. There's a reason for that. Maybe we're going to talk about. Majority of these beds were from al-fuqara wal-masakin, the poorest, and that's what the founding document says. Please, let's attend mainly to those, the war displaced. We had the fall of Antioch, the fall of Jerusalem, and then a bit later come the Mongols. And then so refugees have always been a big part of Damascus population. They still are. We still have many Kurds, many Circassians, many Armenians. This is like the way Damascus is. Soldiers with PTSD were a major amount, and the mentally unwell. And the mentally unwell had one specific wing of this hospital, which we can claim it was the first in the world.
SubhanAllah. And I do want to talk about how the mentally ill were treated. But before we discuss that, you mentioned the term waqfiyya, the idea of a waqf, awqaf in Islam. So I suppose that tells us a little bit about how it was funded. Because, of course, in the West, normally, and probably across the world now, most institutions, most health institutions, most mental health institutions as well, are funded by the state, the central state. What made the funding structure here unique?
So the waqf is a way which is not public and it's not private. It's very different from our Western categories.
Yeah.
So waqf is related to a root in Arabic which means to halt. So it has a waqfiyya or a legal document. And this specifies that a certain property will be forever endowed to a specific use. Perpetually. It can't be sold. Nothing can happen to it. So the waqf for this hospital is a big one. And what it contained is that there was a market, which is Suq al-Khayatin, just back to the corner, is the market of the tailors. And that market, every shop had to pay the rent, of course. But the rent didn't go to a private owner, but went to the waqf. And then from that rent, it was split between the Madrasa Nuriya, so the center of learning over there, and here. So, by the way, the relationship between a madrasa, a suq, and the Bimaristan is a conceptual idea of the just city for Nuruddin. Right. And of course, knowledge is the highest one. In fact, he is buried in the madrasa, and you can see his burial place. He loved knowledge so much. He founded more than 40 madaris. So in Damascus, this waqf economy was fundamental. In classical times, 50% of urban land was a waqf and 75% of agricultural land was waqf. And this is the solution for mental health because it's immune to political change. We know sometimes governments change complete different ideas on the priority of mental health. It's also immune to market extraction. And it's legally bound to certain founding values. But then big problems happen during the colonization. And there is this very interesting book by John Hall, which is The Destruction of Waqf in the Middle East, in which he talks about how Waqf was systematically and willingly dismantled because it was an obstacle to the West economical system. And it was either socialist or capitalist or whatever they wanted to bring. It was something that didn't fit. And however, apart from that fact, here in Syria, we still have a lot of the documentation. We still have a waqf ministry. So this is not completely destroyed, although there are a lot of problems. And what I want to claim is that for mental health, it's fundamental to reinstate the waqf, because the waqf is the only model that historically achieved universal free care for everybody, especially on the mental side.
So explain that. Like, how is it? What's the mechanism of the waqf to allow for an institution like this to perpetually be funded?
Yes, so on the waqfiyya, on the contract that starts and explains what the waqf will work for, there are some aims, and one of them is going to be one wings will have to be for mental health, and explain which type of treatment. It can be very detailed, these founding documents. And then the waqf will have an administrator which can receive a little bit of a compensation, or sometimes is voluntary. That administrator, if he doesn't follow what the waqfiyya says, can be cited by the qadi in court, and then the qadi answers to the sharia. So there is no human to which you're answering in the end. So this is, the sharia says you should legally adhere to that document, and you have to, there's no room to play around in this, which is very different from any other mental health organization around.
And the funding stream, like how does, Nuruddin Zengi passes away, how does an institution like this continue to fund itself?
So in the case of this waqf, all the shops of the market would be of property of the waqf. So there are nobody private who can choose, then I don't want to give this to charity anymore. Because we also have the problem in the West, right, of charity. You want to give it, then you give it back. Yeah. So here you can't do it by the Sharia. You cannot move and you cannot destinate the profits of that market to anything else except the madrasa and the Bimaristan in specific amount and in specific percentage. In fact, from the name, waqf, it's locked.
Assalamu alaikum. This is your brother Mazen Mukhtar, CEO at Baytul Mal. In many parts of the world, the nearest hospital is not just miles away, it's out of reach. For displaced families and vulnerable communities, illness becomes a daily battle, fought without medicine, without doctors, and with little hope. That's why we go where others can't. Our Baytul Mal mobile clinics and medical teams bring healing to the front lines, treating infections, providing maternal health care, and offering comfort where it's needed most. Through our vision projects, we fund cataract surgeries, restoring more than just vision, but dignity and hope to those who thought they'd never see again. Those aren't just services, they're lifelines. Every donation you make helps rewrite someone's story, from pain to healing, from despair to hope.
Please visit btml.us/thinkingmuslim to donate now. Fantastic. So a proportion of the funds that the shopkeepers, cafe owners were able to procure for themselves would go towards a waqf, and that would...
That's not tax at all.
Yes, of course.
Just the rent.
Yes.
So it's exactly like renting a shop. Instead of renting from a rich Damascene man, they rent from the waqf. But this is very important. This economical model is not taxation. It's very different from, like, let's say, the Scandinavian system where they tax people more than half of their income. No, we don't do that. 0% tax for the Bimaristan. It's just your rent. Or sometimes it can be a field and its crop goes to the waqf and so on and so forth. It is never a waqf with taxation.
So tell me, what did physicians here understand about the relationship between the body and the soul?
The most important insight is that the body and the soul were never understood as separate by doctors, not by theologians. So, for example, we have one of the founders of Islamic medicine, Islamic psychology, which is Al-Balqi. He writes a book which is called The Sustenance for the Body and Soul, in the title, Masalih al-Abdan wal-Anfus. And sometimes we understand in Islamic medicine that the soul and the body are just two sides of the same coin. It's not even like dualism or Cartesian craziness. And this has a basis also in our hadith. We know that the Prophet ﷺ said that there is a piece of flesh, that if that is sound, everything of the human being is sound, and that is the heart. That's why every treatment of Islamic medicine and Islamic psychology is heart-centric. And for example, also the mind was included. We have here in the Nuri Bimaristan Mu'ajalat al-Fikr, which is a type of treatment in which you reorder the thoughts of the person, which means that, of course, Muslim doctors invented cognitive behavioral therapy 800 years before the West. But aside from, say, who came first, the objective is very different. Also, the body, how was it treated together with the mind? Well, a lot of the measures that they were used here were, for example, diet, exercise, sleep. The problem today is that sometimes, not only the doctors in the West, but also us, we became a bit lazy. So we prefer the pill. Because when the treatment tells us, look, you should really change your lifestyle, and that will give you healing. We also have a basis in the Quran that Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change themselves. And we instead want just a product to change us. That's the same thing where we buy the agenda to be more productive, right, in the beginning of the year, the gym membership. No, it's going to be us. So, and then this was very well understood until Cartesianism came. And then even in Muslim countries, we started perceiving the body as a machine, which brings to whole forgetfulness of who we are. And the consequence is that the body is the field of medicine, the mind is psychology, and the soul is whatever, nobody cares really, or spirituality or marketing. And this as a specific category, it's called re-injury through misdiagnosis. And that is what many Syrians are suffering. Syrians whose suffering is caused by displacement, by war, by being injured in any place that will import diagnostic categories from the West. So it's very important to go back to this model to not re-injure the suffering. Also, another point of treatment and understanding that the doctors nowadays don't is the training. Training here, and happened in this room, used to be multidisciplinary.
Right.
So we have the chief doctors like Ibn al-Nafis, expert on Shafi'i fiqh and medicine, or others were poets and doctors, or musicians and doctors. That's why when we talk about doctors in the classic age, sometimes we call them hakim, so a sage, a wise man, not only a doctor, and that makes all the difference.
Fantastic. And we spoke earlier about just the aesthetics and the sort of additional instruments like music and water and light and the garden views. How much of this plays into this sort of duality you've talked about of the body and the soul?
This is one of my favorite topics because treatment here used to be completely personalized. So it's not that just because we understand man anthropologically in a certain way, we're going to do the same thing on everybody. Nowadays, for example, we talk about taking care of your spirituality. So download an app and do 15 minutes of meditation, whoever you are. No, this is not what happened here. Let's make the example of music to understand it.
Yeah.
We have Al-Farabi, who was doctor and famous musician, who wrote Kitab al-Musiq al-Kabir, the great book of music. In it, he says that there are musical modes that are specific for some psychological effects, and the whole theory of maqamat, and then Turkish music, and so on and so forth. And these sounds are specific for both bodily and psychological characteristics. So you would use, for example, Rast for mental agitation, or you would use Isfahan for people who had trouble with memory or became a little sluggish, a little lazy even, or Hijaz for people that are too proud and arrogant. So you would think, okay, look at the categories that are being treated together. They are mental, they are spiritual, and they are bodily. And in this Bimaristan, by the way, not only music, but also storytellers used to come here, which is a very Damascene touch because it's a tradition of the city, and some of the very last few storytellers still operate here in cafes and so on. Yeah. And there was a budget here for the storyteller. And also water was used as a therapy for different categories. For example, depending on the sickness and the body properties of the person, how much to drink was suggested, or hydrotherapy. And then we have in the Bimaristan Qaymari a lot of environment care. For example, patients that were less severe would be told to walk in the gardens and see, for example, the fruit growing, the vegetable growing, and so on. But the very agitated ones would be kept, just look at the window, because it might be too much for you. However, unfortunately, most of the protocols of these are lost, so that's a pity. But you know, this type of approach, not just looking at mind and body, but looking at the specific individual, is what today the elites buy for millions of dollars, and they call it precision medicine. There is now a term which is used, personomics. And the idea is that we started doing group medicine in the West based on statistics, then precision medicine, and then personalized medicine, and then really knowing the person. And this is the new barrier for medicine, and is what billionaires are buying. And here it was available literally for everybody.
SubhanAllah, right. And I understand this was the first institution that kept systematic patient records. What was that about? Like, why did they pioneer in archival and keeping records in such meticulous ways?
Yeah, this is so interesting because there's also a theological reason. So let's start from the records. What did they include? There was the condition at income, there was the doctor's observations, then there would be the treatment applied, the specific response of the patient, and then also the condition on discharge. Right. And this brings two consequences. One, you now have data, so you can do population studies. And indeed, these were done, and then it becomes evidence-based medicine. But then another reason is that the individual patient becomes the unit of medicine. So it becomes like a science of the particular, and then follow-up care becomes possible. And when I was reflecting about what can be the theological basis of this, I reflected on the Quranic idea of individuality, that every nafs will taste death, and whoever kills one soul is as if he killed all mankind, and whoever saves one. And when we look at whoever saves one is ahyaha, like it revives the nafs, it gives it life. Very relevant to physicians, yeah, and also keeping patients' record is in some way closer to what the angels do in a very metaphysical way. So remember, keep track. This is also brings a lot of contemplation for the physician. So I believe that keeping tracks is not like many Orientalists say it was just about Arabic medicine being scientific. No, this is about fulfilling our civilizational obligation towards individual souls. And I claim that our society can be saved doing this also in practice, not only in theory.
Right, okay. And the founding document you referred to earlier, the waqf, forbade discharging a patient before full recovery. How is that even enforceable here?
Yeah, that sounds like science fiction for us, right,
Yeah.
in the West.
Yeah.
Because our discharge is usually just insurance determined. You're discharged when you don't risk too much to die, so you're going to sue the hospital. That's the criterion. So I want to start from the idea, is it even sustainable
Yes.
to keep a person here for, let's say, 4 years? And there are cases in which people were kept for years here.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's a waqf. So the state's expense is zero, and it weighs zero on taxes. So the budget of the state is not affected. Then there is also an economical advantage of environmental medicine, because a person occupying a bed here is eventually given just water, air, sleep, movement, some herbs made by the bzuriya here, the spice preparators, and some chicken, whatever. This is much less than the $20,000 pill that our system gives. So it's sustainable, yes. And it was enforceable, absolutely. And also there were checks and balances to make sure that the patient was not oppressed in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. How did that work? A patient maybe was discharged and he said, well, I wasn't really ready to be so. Then he could file a madlama, a grievance. And then Nuruddin himself would sit 2 days a month at the Diwan al-Madhalim, the Ministry of Complaints, yeah, and listen. So that's a very big difference, and but that makes us understand that within a different legal architecture to make this work. It's not just a trick of, okay, we make our own little hospital that does things Islamically friendly and that's okay. No, this is reliant on an economical model, on a state model too. Now, there's also a psychological effect on this, because sometimes there are charity hospitals, and these are wonderful. They're taking care of a lot of people in Syria right now. Yeah. But then the patient is the beneficiary of charity, meaning they have to be grateful. They have no way of saying, I wasn't really happy with it. They can't complain, and they're in a submissive position. Imagine what that does to the psyche of someone who is already weakened by sickness. In the Islamic medicine, it would be harmful. So in the Bimaristan, instead, the patient is a right bearer under Sharia law. So this also has an echo, and there are historians that say the Nuruddin after the Khulafa Rashidin is the best, because this is a direct echo of, for example, Sayyidina Umar, when he, in his first khutbah, if I do not do well, please correct me, or Sayyidina Umar, and even had the example of Ali bin Abi Talib using a court case against a Christian man. So this is the kind of leadership that then can sustain this type of institution.
So Dr. Francesca, please tell me a little bit about the physicians here, the doctors. What type of people became professionals and doctors in an institution like this?
So this was an elite hospital, which means that not only they had to be the best doctors in terms of healing outcomes, but also they had to be very bright and keen on teaching, because this was the place from where doctors actually in the whole Levant region used to be educated. Yeah. We can also know a little bit about the type of routine that doctors here had. We have the one about Ibn Abi Usabia, that he used in the morning to do the round of all the beds and prescribe the treatment for the day. And the treatment was, for example, the diet and so on. It was all customized. And then after that, he would pass here in the hall and consult the books to learn more, to perfect his craft. And then he would teach. And then he would go, for example, at the citadel in the palace of the Sultan and attend to them. So that was the type of routine. And we have many other great figures that funded other schools, other educational institutions attached to Bimaristan. But the question, what kind of person, also has a deeper response, meaning that every doctor here was a polymath, every doctor. So we have, for example, Al-Zahrawi, who was also a music player. And I want to make this example about how being a polymath helps you being a better doctor. He used to play the oud and the lute, the Arabic lute. And he had a pet monkey for some reason. And one night the pet monkey ate one of the strings of the oud. And he saw that these strings were never expelled. And so he invented absorbable sutures after this experience. Yeah. And then we have, for example, Al-Razi, that was a musician, as we said. Well, this transfers directly into how he read the pulse. Because pulse reading in Arabic medicine was not just the frequency. No, it was an art of sound and of pressure and of feeling. And he also then founded a whole school of pharmacy because he was also so interested in chemistry and he was an alchemist. And Ibn Sina, he was a philosopher. So then he founded basically psychosomatics. This is very important to understand. The person had to be a hakim, a sage, but not necessarily a Muslim even, because here used to also be Ibn Jumay, the Jewish famous physician of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, who is also buried just behind the corner. So we have sometimes this type of delusion that in the past people used to be polymath because there wasn't that much to know, which is ridiculous because when you understand the amount of things that go into Ibn Sina, Qanun, and then you read his philosophical work, you understand it's much more than what we know. But even if we take that as a criticism, the West is figuring out that the excessive specialization and excessive sectorialization is not making us brighter. Yeah. So the fact that doctors only know about medicine and don't know a lot about psychology, aesthetics, is not making them better doctors. So we really need to revive that as well.
And you said earlier on that this institution was actually built at the height of a conflict, height of war, and it treated patients with PTSD, patients with psychological trauma. Just tell me, how did it treat patients with acute psychological trauma? And was there even a category for psychological trauma in ancient medicine or ancient healing?
What's very important is that in Islamic culture, we never had one word for trauma. Right. And I think this is wonderful, because what we see in the last 15 years, what happened in the West is that trauma is a category that swallowed everything. Your family is trauma, being a soldier whose bomb exploded in front of them is trauma, and all gets boiled together in the same category. So it is clinically ineffective. In our tradition, we never did that.
Yeah.
So we distinguished 20 categories maybe based on the cause. Our medicine, especially our psychology, goes very much root cause and not symptoms, which is very much the difference. So, for example, a depressive state, if it was caused by loss of a loved one, was different than it was caused by loss of property, and was different whether it was endogenous and bodily based. We have so many words that are different, which sometimes makes it a bit difficult to train people or to convey that we had these categories. But for example, for trauma, they used to say that we have different aspects to it that all need therapy. So the grief, for how things used to be before the trauma, the numbing that happens after. And I have been talking about many people in Syria, and most of them say, it was so hard, and I'm grateful that it's over, but I can't feel joy. Like when I'm with my children, like I can't feel. Or if I see something scary, I can't feel. And that's something that in our tradition is assimilate to qaswat al-qalb. The heart became hard. And whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, that's what trauma does to people. So this was also something fundamental. And we have Yaqub al-Kindi that writes a book which is on the art of dispelling sorrows, which is very relevant to this. And he says you should also take care of the cognitive part, not only stabilize the body. Also see, is there something in the mind keeping the trauma awake? For example, it can happen again. You know, this is very powerful in trauma. When people think this outcome is very bad or whatever. And that book was in the library of the Bimaristan. So we also should understand that for treating trauma, in the Quran, we have a lot of relationship between the aql, the reason, and the qalb, the heart. So if the problem is that the heart got hard, we should also use our help with the reason to make it better. And this also trauma, to heal, needs space, support, and time. There is no 6-week out of trauma program, no, and that's usually absent. The only way we can have it is the waqf, where we take the people traumatized by 15 years of war, we keep them for 2 years, treat them well, and then we let them go. So this is very relevant for Syria now because we have trauma at a population level. And what is being offered right now by NGOs, by Western trained therapists, is misrecognizes this suffering. Some Palestinian psychiatrists right now are saying we can't even use trauma because what we're going through is beyond that. Not even the label, the word is correct. So instead, we want to give people names with dignity and an appropriate response without medicalizing it away, giving them space to recover and all the support that they need.
So here you're talking about maybe comparisons between classical Islamic approaches to suffering and modern psychiatry. I mean, is there anything in that classical Islamic approach to suffering that simply has no equivalent in the modern day?
Yes. I would say that if we take the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Health Disorders and we compare it to what we have in classical Islamic medicine and psychiatry, they don't map.
Really?
It's just a complete different thing. Because of the anthropology. If the heart does not exist, and for us the heart is the center of the individual, we're never going to speak the same language. And in particular, this point of the heart hardening and losing capacity to feel, for us is also a key of then the therapy. Meaning, there is this whole tradition of writings in the Islamic world, which is called al-raqa'iq, which means the heart softening. And there are beautiful books. And these books would tell you stories of the awliya or stories of a person who goes through something, and they really make you feel warm and fuzzy. It's a beautiful feeling when you read it. This we have forgotten, but it was our first line of treatment for centuries. Even we had free treatments that were preventive on this. For example, we have the tradition in the Ottoman world of the Mesnevi Han, people that comment the Masnawi of Rumi, which is basically that in 6 volumes, and that prevents. Because then when difficulty hits, you have like a bank of positive thoughts and positive ideas to support you through it. But aside from diagnostic categories, Islam gives a meaning to suffering. And that's really what changes the whole ball game of suffering. Because you might have a tradition which is more accurate. I know you can do acupuncture of taking an opiates, but if you think this is meaningless, this is going to destroy you anyway. So the idea for us is that the trial, the ibtila, elevates the sufferer. So it's a form of tarbiyah rabbaniya, of education coming from Allah for you, customly chosen for you. And this is what allows Muslim in history to survive a catastrophe without nihilism. If we compare, for example, the Mongol invasion and how Muslims were and their faith was afterwards with the catastrophes happening in Second World War in Europe and how that caused the loss of religion, we can see how meaning is fundamental in suffering. And also the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us signs in the horizons and in our own selves. So this self-pain is a sign. There is something we can read about this. So nowadays Syrians really need to be told that their suffering has a meaning, and they need to be explained which meaning. And no Western modality ever can do this.
This building within which we sit today is now a museum. What was lost the moment this place became converted into a museum?
So the hospital was open for about 700 years.
Right.
And then it became a girls' school, a commercial school, and then becomes the museum. But the museum of what? That's also very important, because now is the museum of medicine and science in the Arab world. Arabica, not Islamic, which operates 2 erasures at once. First, it removes the role of non-Arab Muslims, which is fundamental here. Syria has a big richness in its minorities. Syrians love the mosaic of different people that constitutes their country. We have the Bimaristan is a proof. It's called Bimaristan from Persian. It was the Qaymari was founded by a Kurd, and the Nuruddin was Turkish as ethnicity. And we have at the beginning the Andalusian visitor that comes and immortalizes it. So this is a horrible erasure. And then it also erases Islam as the framework of everything. Erases the waqf, erases the fiqh, erases accountability, politics. In fact, the exhibition that is curated here was a collaboration between the École Française of Islamic Studies and the Ba'athist cultural policies. So it's really a very ideologicized reading. It's what we would call nowadays in Islamic studies epistemicide. So this unfortunately cannot be fixed by adding or patching up. But this is an opportunity, for example, to make this a museum of Islamic medicine and give it a section dedicated to Islamic psychology that would be the first in the world, and explain the real roots of multi-confessionality, multi-ethnicity, and the beauty of diversity in Islamic medicine.
So I know you've said that this place, could be converted into a more genuine, authentic museum. So is that an admission that what happened here is not reproducible anymore in the modern age? Like, have we moved away from the type of healing that we saw in the 12th century under Nuruddin?
No, I don't think so. I think that what is here still intact is enough if there is a will to restart it completely. Because I want to just explain what is intact. Not only the building, and the value of this building is something incomparable, because we know in the West hospitals are not built this way. But also the surrounding fabric is more or less preserved. During the resistance from Syrians towards the French burnt a big part of the old city of Damascus, which just stops at the beginning of the Bimaristan, which was saved. And that is saved. The souk from which the waqf is endowed is saved. The Madrasa Nuria is saved. The waqf document is safe, and it is preserved at the waqf ministry. And I know that right now the Ministry of Awqaf is really doing their best to restart some of the Awqaf. And what I want really to call them is, please prioritize the Bimaristans, because it's what the people need the most. So, of course, though many things are broken, for example, the ijaza, the transmission link of Islamic medicine, at the moment I don't think there is anybody in Damascus that is directly related to Ibn Nafis and Ibn Sina. But we can do our best. We can do our best, and the part of the waqf money was also for research, was also for education. So if that is restarted, we can do this. Definitely, it's not impossible. And this brings us to a strange asymmetry for the Bimaristan, because the infrastructure is intact, but the human capacity is maybe at the lowest point. But it's just going to get lower if we don't try to restart it in any way.
So Syria has just come out of 15 years of war, of revolution. Alhamdulillah, we're in a liberated Syria now. What genuinely needs to change? What needs to be adapted? What needs to happen in order for this place and places like this? Because I understand there are other Bimaristans that you visited here in Damascus. What needs to happen to really revitalize this form of medicine and this form of treatment in places like Syria?
Yeah, so the first thing is, if we want to take the least effort path, is to rename and recurate here as a museum. Yeah. So re-put the Islamic conceptual frame, explain why there is Surat al-Fatiha there, why there are these ayat here, and make it the first museum of Islamic psychology in the world.
Right.
Then maybe we could restart the Qaymari as the working institution, revive its therapeutic design, make it a clinical training, for example, in Islamic medicine or Islamic psychology, or a free clinic for the population of the neighborhood, and restart a waqf-funded mental health clinic network across Damascus. Right. And this could even position Damascus as the global capital of Muslim mental health. Damascus is really trying to be seen as a cultural place, to restart its roots and to exit from 60 years of erasure of Islam. And so this is really a golden opportunity, is what the population need. And actually, I would say Damascus could offer the world what we need, because as Muslims in the West, we know the trend of Islamic psychology is huge. People are seeking this knowledge everywhere. They're seeking these books. They want to know about these things. So I think this is really fundamental, and it's a great opportunity.
Yesterday I spoke to some members of the government, and we were talking about the challenges this society and this state faces, and it's obviously many economically. I mean, 80% of Syrians today are in poverty. Do you think that revitalizing an institution like this really should be a priority at this moment in time for the state and for those interested parties in wanting sort of to move Syria forward?
Yes, because the power of a state is its people. You look, Nuruddin came at a time in which the situation was exactly the same, if not worse. You can't claim it was any better. And he thought, I should take care of the broken ones. Not just because he was a charitable guy, but this place is built for exactly this circumstance.
Right.
And so these walls absorb the same suffering before. And we know that from the Quran, with hardship there is ease. Ease is not only economical. A new government here should not only focus on electricity prices and so on, but also on the spiritual health of people. Syrians are now looking for mental health because they know they're broken and they only find Western content. And this Western content pushes them away from, for example, the enlarged family, or many of the core values that we need for our society. So for the Syrian listener, I would really like to stress the fact that, this is your inheritance built for this situation. We have an idea in the West which is called conservatism, right? Yeah. And in which, building on Edmund Burke and so on, they say that society is an association between the dead, the living, and the unborn. And is not built by a contract, but by trust. And so these exactly are the responses that your ancestors gave to exactly this type of problem. And so they need to be taken seriously, or the risk is to lose what our culture was meant to preserve. And that's why it's also a priority for the government. And one last thing on this topic is that I feel that the whole Ummah wants to cooperate for the love of Syria. Yeah. And that was the case in the past. In fact, this is a Persian institution with Turkish and so on and so forth. There might not have been any Italian at the time, I don't know, but maybe. But so, we are with the Syrian people, and we really want to help as much as we can in building what they need to heal. And this is one of the key ways to do so.
So if we started this conversation with the waqf of Nuruddin Zengi, if Nuruddin, the great ruler, was to walk into this courtyard today, to walk into this Syria today that has been ravaged by 15 years of civil war, what do you think he would do first?
Well, Nuruddin was a very practical person. There is one of his biographers, who's Ibn Athir, that describes him as someone who just slept on a simple mat and dressed very simply and was really onto the practical side of things. So I guess that he would walk downtown and assess how much of the waqf is still surviving, how severe is the destruction of the neighborhoods. And then what I guess he would do next as the first action is to refund the scholarly chain, because he loved knowledge so much that he's buried in the madrasa. So he understood that knowledge transmission comes really first. So maybe he would make a Damascene Institute of Ilm al-Nafs, of Islamic psychology. And also, this is very important, invite the best scholars from the Muslim world. Because for the Syrians, it might be very strange that there are foreigners that are interested in the Bimaristan, but actually there is a whole trend nowadays in academia, which is about interesting in the Bimaristan. There is a Stanford lab, which is just directed towards this by Dr. Rania Awad. They publish a lot of articles, books, they do education. Also, in other parts of the Muslim world, Islamic psychology recognizes the Bimaristan as its own founder. And so I would really guess that would be given a lot of effort. Bring those scholars here to teach and to revive this. And he would also attend to the small things personally, like he used to do 2 days a month, to listen to what are people sad for, how can we help them for this. And he would do this within months, because at his own time, he did not wait for stability. He understood that building this institution produces stability, not the other way around.
And Dr. Rania has written his book on the Bimaristans, which I think would be a great accompaniment, really, to today's conversation, to those who want to find out about these institutions and their place in Islamic history. Now, finally, I want to ask you about Damascus, because you're someone who you visited Damascus on a number of many occasions before in the past. And of course, you've seen Damascus pre and post liberation. Underneath everything, tell us about what this war has managed to not take away from the people and from this city.
A lot was not taken away, but it's fragile now. Yeah. Although before it was very strong. So we need to take the maximum care to preserve it, because it might be that in one generation it might be lost. In particular, I'm talking about the knowledge of the living. There are still many of my own teachers, of very well-known teachers that are here, they're very old. Many of them don't have an inheritance ready, don't have a big group of younger students taking up what they have to teach. Though, however, here in Damascus still, a lot of examples from the past. And we have the tombs of incredibly important figures, and we know that Islamically it's very important to visit the cemeteries. This softens the heart, but not only softens the heart generically. You can reflect on that person's inputs. For example, we have very close by Ibn al-Qayyim, who was the author of many treatises on the spirit. And also we have room for diversity, because in the same city we have buried Ibn Taymiyyah very near, Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi of the Hanbali, Ibn Arabi, and that says something about healing and psychology too. But also the Sahabas who are buried here can be an example of resilience. For example, Bilal radiallahu anhu, or Abu Darda as the transmitter of most of the hadith about the nafs, about the spirit. And also we still have the institutional memory of the waqf. In some countries, there's nothing anymore. Yeah. We still have the preservation of the waqfiyah, we still have a ministry dedicated to it, and we still have the bricks and the constructions. So we also have speaking Arabic, which might sound trivial, but this is direct connection to the knowledge. Not achievable elsewhere, not achievable in America or in Indonesia or in other places that are very interested in Islamic psychology, but they have the language barrier. So. And also, beautiful thing of Syria that I love so much is the culture. You know, in this culture, even the smallest thing is connected to Allah. Once upon a time in the market, they used to sell lettuce by a short dua. It used to be like this. That's really what all Damascus is about, in manners, in how you thank each other. So all small things are connected to spirituality. It would be a shame if the big things get disconnected too, if suffering, if healing. So it's really important to revive this.
Dr. Francesca, I really I'm so fortunate to have met you here in Damascus and to have this conversation. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really heal the people of Damascus and of Syria after this really awful time. I see optimism here, alhamdulillah, and I know you see optimism. And, you know, inshallah ta'ala, we pray and hope, as you said, that Damascus and Syria becomes the center of this form of healing once again, and becomes a model for Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities around the world, inshallah ta'ala.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Now you've reached the end of this show, and the fact that you've stayed until the very end tells me that you truly believe in our work. Please consider making a one-off donation or becoming a member by visiting thinkingmuslim.com/membership. Now your contributions give you exclusive behind-the-scenes access and the ability to ask questions to our guests, and monthly calls with myself, my team, and our guests like Sami Hamdi. Jazakallah khair, and keep us in your du'as.